All right, we are joined now by a man who has done play-by-play for the Baltimore Orioles, San Diego Padres, Texas Rangers, and Washington Nationals, and has done work covering the NFL for CBS and NBC, and the NBA for TNT and TBS, as well as college football over a career which has spanned more than 40 years. Mel Proctor. In addition to his body of broadcasting work, Proctor has appeared in Homicide, Life on the Street, and the original Hawaii Five-0 as an actor, and has published 2 books, and comes with oodles of stories. So, Mel, how are you today?
Great, that's quite a lead-in. Thank you.
Well, let's start with your first book. I love the work, but I hate the business. I won't even pull any punches here. What do you hate about the business?
Some of the people you have to work for, uh, the the competition that sometimes can become a little devious. Mainly, it's having people in control of your destiny without you having too much of a say in it.
Now, there's a great story about your former Baltimore broadcast partner, John Lowenstein, that involved your son. Can you share that story with our listeners?
I'm trying to think which one that is.
The one where you dressed your son up to look like Lowenstein with the mustache and all.
Yeah, there were so many of them. John Lowenstein is quite a character, and he had long hair and a mustache and wore glasses. And so the team was struggling at the time. And so I thought it'd be fun to have my son Billy, who I don't know how old he was, 9 or 10, I guess. And much smaller than John, obviously. So I put a home team sports shirt on Billy and a microphone in his hand. He sat next to me. John was underneath the chair. So I told Billy when I asked him a question to just move his mouth, and John would actually answer the question underneath the chair. You'd hear his voice. So I think I said, John, here we are. This team's lost 5 in a row. John, are you losing weight? And he started to answer some ridiculous answer about being on some stupid diet or something. So we did the whole interview like that. We did a lot of different things, John and I.
Yeah. Now, you had spent years with the Orioles. You were around Cal Ripken and team with Ron Darling in the past. So I wanted to pick your brain on this. During last year's American League Championship Series on TBS, there are quite a few instances where Cal would say something, then Darling would come right back and almost corrected his view as if to say, well, it's actually this, not that. In your experience, with that kind of thing happening in the booth, can it get a little dicey during the commercial break between the analysts?
I think in this case, probably not, because I happen to have some insight into this because my son is associate director on the broadcast. So
all right.
he's there with Ronnie and Cal. I think what you're getting from them is insight from a infielder hitter, and the other side from a pitcher. So sometimes you do get conflicting information, and I think that's good. That's healthy. I think it makes good conversation.
Now, while you were still in Baltimore, I mean, you talk about like the '89 team starting out like 0-21. How, from a broadcast standpoint, how difficult is that to make it enticing for the viewer and the team struggling that much?
Well, you just have to make sure that you have a place to go afterwards that serves massive quantities of alcohol. No, what was your question again?
Like when the team starts out like they did that year, about 0-21. I mean, how difficult is that to make the game interesting for the viewer when you know there's probably a very good chance the team is going to come up short that night?
Well, yeah, that becomes a real challenge, and it's funny that you mentioned John Lowenstein. I guess about midway through the 21-game losing streak, he said to me, you know what? It would really be better if they kept losing, because that way they're going to get more media attention. It will descend on this place like vultures if they continue to lose. If they happen to win one, that's going to screw it up.
Right.
And they continued to lose, and so what we did is they were pretty deep into the losing streak. So I asked our director if there was some way that on the on-camera opening he could remove our heads, and they could do that technically somehow, chroma key or whatever it used to be called. So we did the opening, John and I, and you saw our bodies, and you saw us holding the microphones, but our heads were gone. And I explained that, I said, John, this morning I left for an Orioles game, and my neighbor saw me and said, what, have you lost your head? So, the team, Frank Robinson was the manager. He didn't think it was very funny.
Probably not.
Kicking sand at the players' faces, and I said, well, win a damn game, Frank.
Now, with all your broadcast experience, this is something I have to ask. Tim McCarver was a national analyst for many years and covered just about every World Series from the 80s until his retirement a couple seasons ago. McCarver caught the ire of many baseball fans with his style, but as a fellow broadcaster, do you think he got a bad rap? I mean, what did you make of McCarver as a color man?
Well, I actually worked with Tim a couple of times on Fox telecasts, and I loved working with him. There's no better prepared or knowledgeable broadcaster. I thought he was great to work with. Good guy, sense of humor, just on top of things. No, I loved working with him, and I think people that had a problem thought that sometimes he would overanalyze to an extreme, talking about the spin on the baseball and things which everybody talks about now. I mean, it's ridiculous now. They've got all these percentages that they can get to. Guy throws a fastball 50% of the time, curveball 18%, that kind of thing. So compared to what's going on today, I don't think he really did overanalyze, but I thought he was terrific.
Now, when you worked with him, it's something that's always been interesting to me. I mean, I've never seen an analyst that was able to predict what was going to happen like McCarver. I mean, the 93 All-Star game, he called a wild pitch right before it happened. You know, when the Yankees pulled the infield in against Luis Gonzalez in 2001 World Series, he thought, Rivera's going to jam him, he's going to hit a looper, this could be dangerous pulling the infield in. That's exactly what happened. I mean, did he do that a lot when you worked with him?
I think he did that a lot all the time. I mean, he played for 20-some years. He was a catcher, and I think more catchers go on to become successful major league managers than most other position players because they got to be involved in so many aspects of the game. Oddly enough, he played for Gene Mauch in Montreal, and Gene sent 19 different people to become major league managers. So, I wouldn't think that McCarver got all of his knowledge from Mauch, but he must have got some of it.
Now, you'd work with the Padres, so when it comes to San Diego, it goes without saying Tony Gwynn is, was, and ever shall be an icon. After his passing, Keith Olbermann shared some great stories, and that, the way you thought Tony Gwynn was, he was. So I have to ask you, you have to have many, but give us your go-to Tony Gwynn story.
I think it was when I first got there. Again, my son gets involved in this. He was like in high school, and so it's a two-part story, really. We're in the dugout, and my son's kind of uptight because these are new players, a new atmosphere. He hasn't been around them, and Tony was standing there. He looked at Billy, and he said, "Billy, relax. This isn't Baltimore," and gave that cackle laugh, his trademark, and it just loosened everything up. And that was Tony. But the story that I really remember is my son was in a slump in his little league or youth league or whatever he was playing in. And so I asked Merv Rettenman, the hitting coach, I said, "Could you possibly spend a few minutes to work with my son, get him straightened out?" He said, "Okay, bring him in Sunday morning early, like 9 o'clock in the morning." Now, they'd had, I think, an extra inning game the night before against Seattle. And so I brought Billy in at Sunday morning about 9 o'clock. We went into the indoor batting cage, and Merv was there, and Tony Gwynn was also there. And Tony was in the cage, and he'd worked up a sweat. And I said, "Tony, what are you doing here?" I said, "The rest of your teammates are probably still asleep, and you're in here early in the morning after a late night game?" And he said, "Trying to figure out a way to hit Randy Johnson, who was the opponent that night, because he didn't hit the left-hander very well." So that tells you about the work ethic of Tony Gwynn. To be in there that early, working on things. And then Merv did spend time with my son, got him straightened out. But yeah, Tony was one of a kind, wonderful guy. My son and his son, Tony Jr., were in high school at the same time in opposing schools, and used to play basketball against each other. And so Tony and I would be side by side in the upper deck with our video cameras, recording our kids' exploits and talking about life. And I had a chance to work with Tony as a broadcaster before he passed away, and that was a great thrill, He was very special.
After all your years in the business, they're stepping in to replace Derek Jeter at shortstop or John Elway at quarterback. Then there's being the play-by-play man who takes over when Vin Scully finally decides to call it an immaculate career. How would you even go about that if you were in those shoes?
I've never thought about it because I knew it would never be possible. But you certainly can't try to emulate Vinny because he has his own unique style, style and personality, and I think you just have to try to be yourself, which is going to be difficult. That's going to be one of the most difficult acts to follow in the history of broadcasting. Nobody's going to be good enough.
Right.
But what it requires is, and this again gets back to the I love the work but I hate the business. It's going to require management with patience to stay with whoever is hired for that job, because it's going to be extremely difficult, especially in the beginning. And fans may react and get upset. Going to put a lot of pressure on whoever the broadcaster is. So I think the management has to be understanding, and they have to be patient. So we'll see how that plays out.
As I had mentioned earlier, you've done some work with acting, but I wanted to focus on Homicide. What was it like on the set with veteran actors like Yvette Cotto and Richard Belzer, and how did that role even come about for you?
Well, it came about because Barry Levinson, who produced the show, the famous movie director, is from Baltimore, was a big Oriole fan, and he was in the owner's booth one night. We were broadcasting the game, and I saw him walk by like he was leaving, and I said on the air, I said, "Oh, Barry Levinson's here, the guy that produced or directed The Natural and all these other movies." And I said, "Too bad Barry couldn't stop by and be with us." And pretty soon we got a note that said, "I love you guys' work. I watch you all the time on my satellite dish in L.A. Barry Levinson." So I told the usher, I said, "See if you can find him, So he caught up with him, and Barry said, "Yeah, I'll be glad to come on the air with you guys." So he came down, and we did an interview with him on the air and had a great time. And as he was leaving, I said, "Barry, I've done some acting. I've got my AFTRA SAG card. I know you're shooting Homicide here in Baltimore." And he said, "Well, get a hold of me, and we'll try to set up something with a casting director." So that's what, he didn't just give it to me. I had to go in for the casting director and read for the part and compete with others. And then I was hired to play Grant Besser, of all things, an annoying reporter, actually a newspaper writer. So I was fortunate enough to be in 8 episodes, and it was great working with those guys.
So let's move on to your new book, The Little General, Mauch A Baseball Life. Mauch was a manager about whom Sparky Anderson once said, "If you had the best club, you had a chance to beat him. If he had the best club, you had no chance. If the clubs were even, he had the advantage." Said he managed against them for a long time. He always had the better teams. Mauch wasn't aloof. He was only intense. So, he was a fantastic skipper, to be sure. What led you to pen this book?
I was actually between Major League Broadcasting jobs. I just left the Padres. I needed a job. So I took a position as a television sportscaster for a startup station in Palm Springs, California. And it was 2002. Gene Mauch lived there. He was retired from baseball and was there and played golf every day. And the Angels were in the World Series against the Giants.
Right.
Gene had managed the Angels. So I thought it'd be interesting to put him on the air as an analyst, like before games and after games in the World Series. So I tracked him down and mentioned it to him, and he said, "Well, why don't you come over to the house and we'll talk about it." So I drove over to his house, which was on a golf course, and we talked about it. And I realized in talking to him how sharp he was. He wasn't the bitter old man that I thought he be, but he was a guy who still loved the game. He recorded 4 baseball games a day while he was playing golf, and then would have a cocktail or 2 and watch them at night. And he was really on top of things. So I said, "I've got my man here to be the analyst." But I said, "Gene, I've got a problem. We're just a brand new station. We don't have any advertisers yet, so we can't pay you." And he said, "Well, if you can just get me a gross of my favorite golf balls, I'll do it." I worked out a deal with a local golf shop to give him some advertising in return for the golf balls. So he got his golf balls, and he did it, and he, as I suspected he would be, he was fantastic.
Now, what did you talk about a little bit with the 64 Phillies with their collapse? Because, that's one of the best baseball quotes I've ever seen with Mauch, saying it was like watching someone drown.
We really didn't get into too many of those things because I had no idea at that time that I was going to write a book about Gene. He was just a friend, and we talked generally about baseball and occasionally about specifics, but I never really prodded him about, why did you use lawnmower bunting on 2 days rest or things like that. I remember I asked him one time, do you miss the game? And as Gene normally did, after somebody asked him a question, he paused and thinking of what he wanted to say, and then he answered and said, I don't miss the airplanes, I don't miss being away from home and being in hotels, but the 2.5, 3 hours a day in that dugout concentrating, I miss that every single day, which I thought was poignant. But we didn't get into all that other stuff too much because he was a friend, and you don't grill a friend about
right.
what's happened in the past in terms of failures.
Yeah. So then finally, tell us a bit about your website, mpsportsmedia.com.
Well, after I left baseball full-time, I did some work for the Big Ten Network. And while I was there, I became kind of a broadcast coach. And I would work with both play-by-play and analysts, and I would look at the videos of their work and make suggestions and try to help them get better. And it worked out really well. The broadcasters loved the help because nobody had really given it to them before. And so I kind of started that as a business. And one of the people I ended up helping was the late Junior Seau. He was doing a show for the Versus Network called Sports Jobs with Junior Seau, where he would do a different sports job on each show. Like he might be in the pit for NASCAR, or he'd be a Dodger bat boy, or a referee in mixed martial arts, that type of thing. So Versus asked me to work with him because he was good on camera with people, but he didn't have any experience really reading scripts on the air and emphasizing certain words and that type of thing.
Okay.
So I spent, I guess, about a month going over to Junior's house on the beach in Oceanside and working with him on different drills, and we did things, and he improved so fast and so far that he did the work, and Versus was overjoyed and sent me a bonus check, which is unheard of in this business. So that's how it started, and I still do a little bit of it.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Mel.
Thank you.